Okay, thanks for coming everyone. We're really happy to have Michael's work in the gallery, and he's been really generous with his time today doing tutorials around the studios. And I'm not going to waffle on. I was going to go up and down on a unicycle juggling I'm not bothered with that bit. So I'll introduce Michael Stubbs. Thank you, Michael.
Hello, and thanks for coming along this evening. I also like to pay some thanks, actually, very briefly, to Tony and Alberto for inviting me here. They've been very accommodating and welcoming, so thank you guys. And I'd also like to say thanks to Steph, Ruby and Beth, I don't know where any of them are here, who were instrumental in helping me hang the show or deciding where to place works. They were also instrumental in helping me design the cabinets where the studio debris is, but I'll talk about that later. I'd also like to thank Rusbar, Jason and David for their help in hanging the show. Without them it would have been a very long haul. Okay, so what I thought I'd do is I'd talk for about 50 minutes to an hour and take questions at the end. I'm going to talk to you about work from 1990 onwards, when I started out as an artist. This particular work you see on the screen here is recent. It's 2014 or 15. I will get to these works later. What I'm also going to do is give you some kind of contextual overview as to how and why I made the works, and also I've got some tabs up on the screen, as you can see at the top, of other art and artists that would have been an influence or an enemy even, that made sense to me at the time. So most of the works that I'm going to show you from other artists will be in the early part of the talk. So I'm going to take you back now to the late 80s. I was on the MA at Goldsmiths. I'd come from Bath Art School, taken a year out, got a studio in London. And things seemed to be happening at Goldsmiths. I thought it was a really great place. I'd been to the MA show, been to see the BA show, and it seemed like a really exciting place, and I thought, I really want to be here. Something was in the air. There was some guy called, I don't know, he put like a cow in some formaldehyde or something. What's his name? He was there, and I thought, yeah, this could be really interesting. So I kind of set my heart on going there, really. And at that time, it was a part-time course, so you had to have your own studio. You couldn't use the school at all, which is not the case now, but in those days it was very much the case. 2-year part-time course. So, you know, London was a very different place then. Britain was a very different place then. The art world was a very different place then. There were no galleries in London, commercial galleries, or there were, but you could count them on one hand that were any good. So we decided it was down to us to kind of decide what we wanted to do. We had to make our own art scene, basically. And Goldsmiths was a competitive place, a very competitive place. And I think it reflected a lot of students' work. So I'm going to go through some of that work that I was making, give you, as I said, some sort of context. So what I'd like to do is go to this page, and I'm going to start right at the bottom here. Sorry, I'm going to go back and just hold the cursor over that so you can see the title. Okay, oil paint on stacked canvases. Now, this painting is very small, it's about this big. I'm going to describe it in terms of materiality and then in terms of context. So this is made with 2 canvases. The exact same pattern is repeated underneath, and one squashed on top of the other. The paint is applied with a palette knife, very, very swirly on these areas just here. And this paint is applied through a cake icer. So they're like ice cream sundaes. They're kind of jokes on painting. This is a very early representational stroke sign painting. it became clear to me very quickly that actually, rather than kind of use a sign or a sign of a representational image or a representation of an image, in fact, it would be more fruitful to actually make the image and object into one thing. So this is a foot square and about 8 inches deep. And it's, again, it's made with made with oil paint only oil paint on canvas, that's important. It's just the methods and materials of high-end painting in inverted commas. So the cake icer, the paint was put into a cake icer, and I would squeeze it out onto each of the 5 panels, in this case in a circular motion. I would then stack the paintings one on top of each other, wait for them to dry for 2 or 3 months, and then I would hang them on the wall about hand height. Not eye height, but hand height. So what kind of idiot would make a painting that looks like a cake by using oil paint on canvas through a patissier's tool? Well, it's a kind of idiotic thing. And yes, they're supposed to be funny, by the way. Or they were. I was trying to kind of... At that time, there was a lot of talk about the death of painting in art schools. I'm sure you've all heard that one before. Somehow painting and the modernist trajectory, of linear history and the modernist trajectory was dead, and the only thing worth doing in painting was to kick its head in, basically. And it's good fun. It's good fun being a right punk, kicking painting until it's dead. Flogging a dead horse, if you like. So this was my response. And the actual cake and the mark making in these paintings is deliberately made to reflect very thick impasto painting, and in particular a kind of taking the mickey out of the kind of English kitchen sink painters of the 50s, whereby artists like Kossoff and Auerbach, whereby they would put very thick impasto paint on the canvases and take this activity very earnestly. Well, I wanted to do the opposite. I wanted to be very unearnest, but earnest in so much as that I wanted to kick them. This for me was quite a complex painting because A, it's monochrome, so also referred to the monochrome in history. And I'm thinking in particular of, excuse me, you're gonna, with this, I've lost it here, I'm afraid. Malevich's Black Square, do I really need to describe that? Perhaps not. I'm sorry, I haven't got the tab up quickly. Malevich's Black Square, historically, of course, as we know, was supposed to be the end point in painting in 1920, I think it was 1919 it was made. The remake was in 1923. His argument was that, you know, though it was remade in 1923 because the original was lost or broken, I don't know, the idea was the idea. I used that thinking here. So I wanted to make the last painting in the way that, say, Malevich wanted to do it historically. I also wanted to reference modern masters. So, for example, the English painting of the 1950s and 60s, as I've just said. I also wanted to reference Jasper Johns' flag painting, which, in this case, reference Jasper Johns, but through his target paintings, not his flag paintings. So there are multiple references here. White also is the colour which is you know, very kind of open. It's like black. Black and white are kind of like almost non-colours. So I wanted to make these kind of jokey paintings which were critiquing the mastery of those art historical characters that I'd been taught to kind of revere. Equally, they were hung in a line, much like a kind of a joke on minimalism. So they'd be about 3 meters apart, hand height. My first show was at the Chisenhale Gallery. In a group show, I showed 6 paintings in the colours of, in sort of cakey colours. So like a pale cream, a pink, peach, and chocolate, you know. And they were kind of arranged like this, not upwards, but in a long line, to mimic a Don Judd type hang. Okay, I've put far too many tabs up here, so I'm going to have to keep going, I'm afraid. I think it's also fairly clear that the paintings, I call them paintings, but they're also sculptures, okay? So let's take another monochrome. They're untitled, and they're called the colour that comes straight out of the can. Most of these paintings are made with cheap spectrum oil paints, so I use the name on the tin. These pieces are also meant to be critiques of the relationship or the boundaries between painting and sculpture. These were other issues that were being talked about at Goldsmiths at the time. Where was the boundary? Where was media specificity? Was it necessary? Probably not. So these paintings are both paintings and sculptures at the same time. Not paintings or sculptures, not things in between, but paintings and sculptures. And it had the desired effect. A lot of the students were competing with each other for attention, and the more crazy the idea, the more likely you to get press and attention in those days. And it really did work like that. Maybe because it was a much smaller scene in London, I don't know. Here's another untitled painting of the same era. Remember, these are, you know, almost life-size cakes, but they're not cakes, they're paintings and sculptures. Everything in the painting is made with viable art materials. This is a two-colour painting, clearly. So I made these paintings for about 2 years, but I found a problem. And the problem was that I was just telling the same joke over and over again. And there was a real negative aspect to these paintings. You know, for how long could I really kind of have this narcissistic relationship with my masters, i.e. Donald Judd, Jasper Johns, Malevich, Duchamp? You know, there's only so long that you can be a punk for. You start to look really dumb when you get to nearly 30 and you're dressing like a punk. Trust me. So I just thought, okay, what am I going to do? Maybe I can think less negatively. Maybe I can think positively about painting. How can I do that when the language just seems so worn out? Remember, this is 1990, 91. You know, those were the questions that were also being asked by other friends of mine. So, I mean, I decided to expand the language, try and expand language. This is untitled ochre. It's about this big. It obviously resembles some kind of cake where I've dragged the kind of knife through on these lines here. But this time the painting is put on, the ochre paint is put on with a spoon. And you can see with these kind of cream areas, the paint is squeezed directly out of a paint tube. So this yet another distancing device, another device where the idea of the hand and the hand gesture is absent. So using tools to make a painting rather than using a brush. Again, this flew in the face of kind of modernist orthodoxy, in particular those kind of gestural painters in Britain like Auerbach, but more importantly, artists historically like de Kooning. Around this time, of course, there was a lot of interest in artists like, or prior to that, artists like David Sally, who'd been critiquing the representational image, juxtaposing and mixing and matching different areas of popular culture, reclaiming them at the expense of high art. Simon Linker, one of my contemporaries, was making paintings like these. For those of you who don't know, they are the copies of the Art Forum adverts. In this particular case, the cover for an Art Forum magazine. They're made exactly the same size as an Art Forum magazine, and you can see he's painstakingly put an impasto surface on to mimic not just thick painting or the gesture, of thick painting, but also to kind of make up the kind of letter forms and the represented image of a famous artist. He famously did a lot of adverts from Art Forum as well, with the names of the artists on. Sometimes they're the images that the magazine had printed. Almost like a wannabe artist. Kind of funny. So this was going around. So here I am, trying to sort of make these kind of jokes still, and this is another one. It's very small. This looks like somewhere a cross between cloth or Burberry or braid, and also brush marks. So it's a very particular kind of nozzle that's used in cake decorating. This is with two panels put together to clash, deliberately clash. I call it Burberry, Untitled Burberry. And you get this sense, for this stage I realised that squeezing paint out of the tubes as a ready-made was still doing the thing of being distant from the gesture and the hand. But here I could start to make pictoriality, albeit abstractly. And by that, I mean, I think you can see here in particular, the black acts as a shadow. So you're getting this optical shadowing, but it is in fact physical. So it's a contradiction. So it's optical shadowing, but acting physically. And I made a number of these. Some were single panels, some were double panels. And this is a prime example of a painting of that time, but it's much smaller. The paint marks are much thicker. The tube marks are much thicker. It's in fact made from a mastic gun. So the top has been taken off a mastic gun and the paint put in and squeezed out. A mastic gun, as I'm sure most of you know, is a decorator's tool, which usually holds silicone in for filling around the edges of baths and windows. This painting is called, as well, it's called Cloud 999. So again, I started to think about the titles. Rather than being untitled, the titles started to come from popular culture. And that was the name of a gambling machine in pubs, you know, the ones where you press the buttons. Cloud 999, which I thought was kind of funny. There was another one called 777 Heaven, and this one was called Nudge City. So here I am, kind of in this situation. I'm going to get through these quite quickly now before we get on to the more recent work, where I'm thinking about this relationship between opticality and painting, but as both physical and optical. But I've still got a distancing device. This is a painting called Untitled Deck Chair, and it's strips of deck chair canvas stretched over a frame. And again, it's a mimic of a certain kind of American formalist painting from the 50s and 60s, Kenneth Noland in particular. That kind of work was very rife, Frank Stella. Again, it was a kind of cocking a snook, if you like, at those kind of modern masters. So here's my version. Here's my dumbed-down Duchampian version. Stretched, cheap, nasty fabric, repeated. Hey presto, you've got like what looks like real art, real stripe painting, real Ken Noland. This is 1993. Okay, I'm going to start showing you these mid-career ones now, or mid-term I call them. This painting is called Art Brut. It's 153 by 122, and crucially I've changed the materials. They're in, it's gloss paint, okay? And what I've got here is a ground, which is the red, or the background, and the figure, which is white. And by figure, I mean that which is placed upon a ground, not necessarily that which is figurative. So figure, ground, figure, ground. And what I decided to do was take the modernist grid, the known modernist grid from Mondrian onwards, place the painting on the floor, paint the red gloss paint as a ground, and pour stripes or grids of white onto that painting on the floor. And of course, gloss paint is quite runny, so it just kind of went gloopy. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So what you've got is this kind of crazy crazy style, crazy paving style grid. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to add a figurative reference to it? And I thought, well, it looks a bit like a de Buffet painting. Again, is a reference to art history. So I called it Art Brut, one of his famous paintings. So this was a really big moment for me. This is 95. And I made a series of paintings along the same idea, but sometimes in eggshell paint, sometimes in gloss paint. This one's called Floppy. It's 3 circles which have gone stupidly wrong. But as you can see a bit of a highlight there. This is where I decided to kind of remake the paintings. So I'd allow the kind of layers to dry and just keep going until I found a layer that I found some way interesting. I don't know how, but I just did. But again, all of the layers would be very regular. There'd be circles or ovals or triangles or grids or something that could refer to a kind of a modernist certainty, a modernist space of control, which I wanted to break open. And finally, from this period, this is 90, I can't remember. It's called Throb. This has tinted floor varnish on gloss, and here are the sizes, 1998. So around this time, 98, 99, I stopped this series. And in this case, the ground is white, a series of white layers, with the final ground being a grid pour of tinted floor varnish, which of course has gone completely AWOL. But of course, crucially, you can see through the tinted area to the layers beneath. That's crucial. So suddenly, if you think back to these paintings, where you've got something like this kind of opticality through physicality, you've got opticality through physicality here, but it's crucially, it's flat. The layers are very flat. They lie one on top of the other. So the surface became paramount for me. The nearest I'd got to any kind of form of rupture between the figure and the ground was probably this painting, because crucially, when it was shown, this white figure, this area here, sank back into the wall and the red ground popped forward. So it was an optical contradiction. Okay, so I'm going to move to the newer paintings now. I'll give you some context later with these. Let me start it. I'm not going to go through all these, it's just they're on my site. I'll start with a painting like this. This painting is called Untitled, Lamb Chop number 8. And as you can see, the difference between this painting and the other painting called Throb that I showed you was that I included a sign, a symbol, which is this white area here. So you've got a white ground, you've got multiple layers, you've got transparent layers, and you've got a symbol embedded with it, or rather an absent symbol. And it's crucial to know that. This absent symbol is in fact a vinyl stencil, a ready-made vinyl stencil, or an image from a ready-made vinyl stencil. So I source the images on the internet. I get those kind of ready-made graphic sites that you can get. You know, you can Google these things all the time. And I got a sign maker to make up these different sizes of kind of pop iconography. Okay? So methodologically, I'd still make the paintings on the floor, wait for the layers to dry, but here I would crucially stick, at one stage in the creation of these paintings, I would stick a vinyl stencil onto the painting and wait for the paint to dry after I'd poured or painted over it and remove it. And this repeated layering with the stencil causes the paintings to go somewhere else, but I'll get to that later. Also, crucially, it references for me certain other tropes in the history of painting. So, for example, I'm trying here, or beginning to try here in 2002, to kind of overlap the kind of historical genres of pop art with the historical genres of abstract expressionism in particular. So if we think about someone like Jackson Pollock, we think about the poor. So I am using the poor, possibly with quotation marks, but trying to reconfigure it. So remember what I said about how I could reconfigure painting to make it a positive, to get out of this kind of negative hole of the death of painting. Crucially, this is Morris Louis from about the late 50s, prior to his very flat-coloured poor paintings. But I'm showing you this because they're translucent, and they were a big influence on me. But the modernist certainty that he's trying to describe, which is one of colour and form in and of itself, only of itself, which would of course please the famous modernist critic Clement Greenberg, whereby Greenberg stated that you had to, all artists needed to kind of get rid of illusion in painting, and in fact work only through its material means, as fact, as both carrier of meaning and expression. So you destroy the window on the world, perspectival, illusory painting, and you work only with material fact of the constituents of painting, which are the material paints and the support that it's on. We now know that's a very limited ideology. So it seemed to me that it would be really interesting to play around with that and play with the idea, both critically and in a positive way, to throw together Greenberg's rather kind of limited understanding of material as material fact, along with kind of pop art's throwaway attitude towards that by using advertising and recognizable imagery and signs in painting, which of course Greenberg famously considered to be kitsch. So for me, it was a kind of way to kind of think about these paintings in relation to other paintings in art history, but also a way for me to introduce kind of signs that I kind of saw around me. You know, these are the kind of things you get in kebab shops. Why not? Also at this time, I was also learning to compose the paintings in a formalist sense, but not giving it the value system, as I've just explained, of formalism per se, but trying to kind of cut and paste in relation to the form of the painting. So for example, for me, the blue areas here are absolutely crucial. Sometimes they arrive by accident, sometimes they don't. An accident plays a large part in these paintings. So this is called BBBEF, that's the name of a typeface, believe it or not. 2004. This is a rather large 2 metre square painting. So I'm reworking these art historical genres, making nods to art history, but I don't want that to be the driving factor. In fact, what I wanted to do was actually see if I could make a formalist painting. Could I work around that idea again? Could I work with it, but in a contemporary fashion? I think the addition of the signs in relation to the pause goes some way towards that. But crucially, the transparency makes a huge difference to these paintings for me, because the moment I introduced it, what you see are multiple layers. And you see layers which go through the painting. You get an opticality. You can see through the painting optically. But if you see the paintings for real, like in the show here, they do have a physicality to them. So the layers are about 1 millimetre or 2 millimetres deep. So they're very much paintings in a space. And I wanted to construct these paintings so that I really didn't quite know what I was doing in terms of form. So I kind of made them up as I was going along. And the hardest thing for me to figure out with these paintings is when to stop. And they tend to get very overloaded. The critic John Chilver, who I'm going to quote from in a bit, refers to them as decorative delirium. I'd like to see this as a reflection somehow of the world, I don't know. But crucially with a painting like this, the opticality is almost unlocatable. There's not a single area that holds prominence in the painting, although arguably you could see this black decorative motif here as kind of holding the painting together in a formal sense. But at the same time, as you recognise that, you can't but help to see all the other areas around it. You are distracted by all the other areas around it. I want that distraction. So you break open not just the recognition of perspectival opticality, but you break open the recognition of flat material or Greenbergian materiality. So it's a multiple perspective. So you see simultaneous layers, optical layers. And knowing when to stop, well, when I have that sense that the painting kind of hangs together in a formalist way, but has this other thing happening where you can't really make out what you're looking at, then I feel that the painting is finished. So these are very multi-layered, and they sometimes take months to make as a consequence. There are drying times especially. Okay, I'm going to move to this painting called Vanitas Extra from 2006. This is 1 meter 22 by 1 meter 22. I tend to work in similar sizes and often in series. Again, the title is important here because I went from using titles that I'd found on the internet for typefaces to using references to kind of Dutch still life painting, namely Vanitas, in relation to the typefaces. Crucially, I started using extra, more popular signs. So, for example, you can clearly see a skull and you can clearly see an image of a dice, etc., etc. But I hope that they don't necessarily become prominent. I hope that they interact with the whole painting all the way around. Equally, this is the first of a group or a number of paintings I've made on mirror or mirrored aluminium. So the audience, when they see these paintings, don't just kind of get this optical hit. They also see themselves looking at this optical hit. So it's quite, I like to think it's quite unnerving to stand in front of. Okay, so around this time, it became apparent to me, it's called Virus Interfacer. Again, there's a clue in the title. This is 2006, again, same size. It became clear to me that these paintings, which were made flat on flat, not only referred to aspects of art history and how to kind of figure a way through a negative point in appropriationist thinking, but somehow, for me, they became almost like a reflection on the screen. And I started to explore what that might mean. So, for example, you can see I've got a whole bunch of tabs here. I mean, there we go, there's Veronese, that's coming up later. I don't know, it seems a bit out of sorts, but I'll talk about that later. In the Windows program, we bring one image up over another, but these images are disembodied, right? They don't exist, they only exist in virtual space. Yes, they're on a real screen, a real physical screen, of course they're getting thinner and thinner. And yes, you have them on your phone. We know that. But there's something really interesting about this relationship, I think, between the disembodied virtual image, which is everywhere, and increasingly so, Instagram, etc., and the physicality of a painting which might reflect that. So for me, this became an extra layer to explore. Could I do something with that? Did I want to use digital imagery in the painting, for example? Did I want to make digital paintings? In the latter case, no. I wanted these paintings to be physical paintings. I wanted you to come into a space, or I would like an audience to come into a space and get the sense of, or the sensation of, a physical object in all its viscerality. So these paintings are a reflection of, rather than an actual depiction of, the screen. In fact, Craig Staff, in his book, After Modernist Painting, I don't know whether you know that, that's Craig Staff, After Modernist Painting, describes this moment in one of the chapters, I think it's chapter 8, called Imagining the Digital. in relation to painting. And he breaks the idea of the word imagining into two parts. So one into the word image and the one into imagining, which you can combine into one word. So for him, image painting, or image painters in the world, use technology to create the paintings. So image painters use technology to create the painting. So for example, Wade Guyton with his, I think I'll bring that up on the tab actually. Wade Guyton who puts his canvases through a inkjet printer, okay? So you get this folded canvas because clearly inkjet printers are only so wide. So he tends to make the paintings quite big. You can see the folds here in the canvas, or I think in this case it's on paper. And obviously inkjet printers aren't really supposed to take canvas or large bits of paper, so he allows all the glitches to occur. So this is an example of an imaged painter. So just hold that in your mind for a moment. I'm going to show you Dan Hayes as an example of an imagined painter. Okay, I think that's the best we're going to get on that. Dan Hayes, so for Craig's staff, the imagined is where an artist or a painter reflects on the screen or the digital. So it's not technologically made, it's a reflection on the screen. So this painting is handmade, but it reflects upon the digital because it refers to the screen. It doesn't actually use technology to make the painting. In fact, what Dan Hayes has done here is borrowed an image from the internet, which has been sent to him by his namesake in Colorado. I know, kind of crazy. Do bear in mind this painting was made in 2000. And he mimics the screen and the bad image, or what was then bad imagery on a lot of internet access. And you get this kind of grid pattern that he paints in very meticulously to mimic the pixelation of the screen. So that's the imagined and the imaged. I think I probably tend towards the imagined. So I reflect. I don't use technology, and I don't intend to at this stage, at the service of the paintings. This is a painting called Grid Eye Motivator from 2010. And here I'm experimenting with very, very clear Jackson Pollock style pores and scratches. Again, there's no brush evident in these paintings. The decorators' tools do what they do. I mean, they're very flat. And I also want to use what decorators' tools mean, both culturally and materially. So here's another layer. So we have the art historical references, we have the references to the screen. But we also have the medium itself, which of course is a sort of dumbed down version of like high-end painting. You know, household paint, I know other artists use it, and I'm thinking of Ian Davenport, for example, Gary Hume, numerous others. But I think in my case, I think it's important to consider where these materials come from. All my materials for all my paintings are all sourced from popular culture. I don't go to art shops to buy anything. So for example, to get cake ices, I had to go to either a pound shop to get the cheap ones, or I would get the specialist metal ones from a patissier shop. I go to a builder's merchant to buy my paints, my household paints, and the floor varnishes, and the tints. I go to a printer to have my stencils cut. So everything is sourced from ready-made places. So I think to add that to the mix makes the paintings, it gives us a reference to the fact that these are very much involved with a popular cultural idea about what high painting could be. I keep thinking I'm missing something out, actually. Okay, well, you know that painting. So here are the newer paintings. I'm going to go through these reasonably quickly. Don't get me wrong, I mean, I love painting. I love it. I'm going to go back to the Veronese painting, which I'm hoping is... Okay, let's stick with Cézanne. Cézanne is one of my great heroes. So I don't just diss older masters, I do love them. I mean, when we diss somebody, we actually secretly love them, I think. It's like a form of irony. This painting, I mean, the paintings that Cézanne made in particular of Mont Saint-Victoire, he made plenty of them, including really fabulous watercolours, have this kind of plane of immanence to them. There's a shimmer to the painting. So by using kind of, regular vertical and horizontal brush marks, he creates this kind of abstracted version of the kind of the visible world. I think there's a reflection of this in my own paintings, I'd like to think. And I look at Cézanne all the time. And there's some great ones in London and all around Britain, actually, most of the museums, where you get to look at the real thing, and it really is makes a fantastic difference. Just excuse me while I lose some of these tabs, okay? Veronese is a Renaissance master that I think is fantastic. I study composition. I study the colour. I study the form. I study the line. I think this device across the middle here to split the painting up is fantastic. I think the way that he's used, you can't see this in the screen image, but the brushwork at the back and the architecture is actually painted very thinly and is translucent. You can see a lot of the underpainting through it, but it gives the effect of architecture. Whereas here the painting is much thicker, much freer, much looser. So, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the fact that I borrow from art history at the same time as I have problems with it. Okay. This painting is called Fire Eye Shift, excuse me. Here you can see a very naughty brush mark coming in. What did I say earlier? I don't use brushes. Well, actually I've started to use the decorator's brush, but crucially they're always bound, or they're bound by the frame, in this case the actual frame of the painting. It doesn't go beyond it, it slides off. As all the other aspects of all my paintings, the paintings go beyond their frame. They're designed that way. They're designed to look almost like fragments, like they could be ever extendable. So there's no one focal point, there's no sense that you've got, solid ground to stand on. You can't stand like with a kind of frame around a Veronese, look into the perspectival point and say, yeah, I can see where I am in relation to that physically. These go beyond the frame. And in particular, the brush mark stops at the edge of the frame. So brush mark has also been included in small areas like this on a painting called Slide Toggle Gradient. Here it's been bounded by this kind of edge here. It doesn't exceed it. In fact, it's a bit of underpainting. And crucially here also I've started to introduce new materials such as spray paint. So I use the signs to spray paint to give the paintings extra depth and also extra signification. Spray paints have a cultural value, right? Graffiti perhaps, spraying cars, they have that same value for me. Okay, can I just go back to the title of that? Velocity, Immersion, Reflector. This is a whole new series of paintings starting here, actually, which I've put on the site. They're a painting called Fourfold Speculative Repeater. I think you're all kind of aware that I've been reading a little bit of speculative realism here. But I'm very interested in that idea of the disappearing object, or the object beyond our physical selves, and that maybe we are not necessarily as beings, we are not necessarily the kind of center of our worlds. That actually we could never know what it's like to be a rock. And that rock may even recognize us. I know it's kind of mad, but I think what it does is it deconstructs and takes apart the idea of the sovereign subject. And I know this is not dissimilar to, say, a post-structuralist like Derrida. deconstructing the text and questioning the sovereignty of the author and the authenticity of the author. Because as Derrida famously said in Of Grammatology, I think it was, he talks about the fact that we are never innocent when we speak. We may say something we believe is truthful. I don't know. The grass is green. We may believe it's truthful, but what he says is there is always an unwritten subtext. And this subtext you cannot ignore. It fractures the authorial voice. It is always present and sliding underneath the sense of the authorial statement. I think in Britain we just call it irony, but hey. So I think speculative realism as a contemporary philosophy, and it's only been around a few years, is a kind of extension of that, but that's arguable, and I'm not sure I have got time to really talk about that now. So these are new paintings. So again, here we have a kind of what looks like a part of a Wi-Fi sign. That's deliberate, but again, I want it to kind of slip in and out of space. I don't quite know where it is. Again, here, the edge of the brush mark is bounded. These white spaces act very negatively. Increasingly, they're coming into my paintings. They punch holes into the image itself, much in the same way as the painting I showed you earlier on, called Art Brut. If you remember, it was the red ground with the white blobby grid. Now, there's another aspect I want to just briefly discuss with you before we start the questions. I'll show you this one. Here you can see, again, imagery coming in, and these are spray images. Now, I'm not sure what I quite make of these yet, but they are in fact borrowed from Gilray and Rowlandson cartoons. Gilray and Rowlandson were 18th century caricaturists in Britain. They caricatured or lampooned political figures in particular. I mean, I like to think maybe there's some resonance, like with certain politicians, maybe in America today, but they are very much embedded within the paintings. They don't take over. When I started using them a few months ago, I was having them right in the middle of the painting, or very visible, and I actually got rather bored with this. Because one of the things I try to do, as I'm making all of these paintings, these newer paintings since about 2001, is I build up the painting for a painting's sake. So we're getting back to the idea of form in painting. So the images become subjected to the painting, not the subject of. And that includes the signs. Now clearly I borrow signs for a reason, but I don't have a problem with just kind of completely losing their reading. I don't have a problem with them completely disappearing. Sometimes I paint whole paintings out. This painting took me about a year to make. So you can see areas like this are remnants of a painting from months before. There's a multitude of imagery here from those source points. Whether they're important or not, I'm not entirely sure. But for me, they are. So I start with narrative source points and then rupture them. And one other thing I wanted to say about the paintings. I'll show you this one first. Is that the decorative materials that I use, and it's going back to this idea of them coming from a populist source point. The decorative often is, I'm sure someone's said to you here at art school, oh, that's just decorative, or oh, that's just illustrative as a painting, which means bad, bad, bad. When someone says that to me, it makes me want to do it even more. So these are overtly decorative. They say, yeah, these are decorative materials. They're going to be decorative paintings. So in a sense, there's an excessive decorativism to them. And I want a very seductive surface. These paintings are designed to seduce. That's what decoration does. You know, Warhol said, I am in the surface of the paintings. Well, maybe that's where I am in relation to these paintings. So the idea of them being a seductive tool, I have no problem with. I mean, God, you've got to compete with Instagram, for Christ's sake. I mean, come on. It's far too technologically sophisticated, whereas this is a lump on object. So if you're going to get attention, you've got to get attention. All right, now look, I'm going to close now, but I just want to quote from John Chilver that I mentioned earlier on. I'll just show you this very briefly. This is a painting I made very recently, but without any varnishing. I'm quite pleased with it, but I'm just going to leave a painting up that you can maybe look at. Let's just try that. Okay, that's on mirror as well. These areas are mirror, believe it or not. Here, here, here. So you can't really see it in the image. I think John Chilver describes my paintings much better than I do. I know it sounds kind of vain that I'm using this to talk about myself, but I just think he's much better at it. Okay, so I'm going to read from... I'll bring the text up, actually. Probably easier, so you can see it. Okay, the title of the essay is called Decorative Delirium. Don't worry, I'm not reading all this. God, no. I'm going to take you down to... I'm going to read that sentence. I'm going to read that bit there, and I'm going to read that bit there. So I'm just going to start with here. So I'll leave the cursor there, yeah, so we know where we are. Okay, I'm just going to read this verbatim. Because I think it'd be easier. Okay, one way to approach these paintings is in terms of layering. Obviously, it's a layering technique, with templates put down and pours applied over them and the templates removed. I've already described that, I know. And the whole cycle repeated until a final decision is reached about the painting. So we are in no doubt about the material layers that we are seeing. But I'm not only talking about material layers here, I'm talking about virtual, or as I'd prefer to say, pictorial layers. Not virtual layers, but pictorial layers. Sometimes these coincide with actual physical applications of paint, so that the material layer is the same as the pictorial layer. Material layer, same as the pictorial layer. But painting as such has always been about a pictorial layering of the image. Sorry, let me just read that again. But the painting as such has always been about a pictorial layering of the image that is discontinuous with the actual matter of the paint surface. He's saying there is a difference, historically. Okay, I'm just going to move down here to the work. So I rehearsed this last night and I can't remember what I rehearsed. Excuse me for a moment, sorry. I think it'll make more sense if I go to... Okay, what is complexity? He's saying that paintings are complex. What does it do? What does it complicate? I've described how the paintings combine a dual process of masking and pouring, and how that results in constant interruptions of the pores by masked edges. This in turn creates distinct domains or ecosystems in the paintings. What do I mean by ecosystems? Imagine driving down a road. There's the world of the inside of the car, which could be social, but also ergonomic, to do with monitoring and controlling the vehicle, and also gaseous and physiological, to do with breathing and the exchanges of oxygen and nitrogen and the carbon inside the car. Outside the cocoon of the car, there is the domain of air currents, eddies and swirls, of turbulences and currents, which constitutes a separate system. The real point about this extended metaphor is that these different ecosystems are simultaneously connected and unconnected. It's important. They neighbour one another in space and time. They act upon each other, but they are also operationally enclosed and apart. The world inside the car affects but does not touch the world outside. These different ecosystems are different in kind. They affect one another without ever really colliding. This is how to understand the complexity in Stubbs's paintings. God, it sounds so vain reading this out, but I've got to do it. I've lost my place now. Okay, this is how to understand the complexity in Stubbs's painting as an exorbitant, almost ungraspable complexity, where the different ecosystems irritate one another and cause each other to stutter without ever properly meeting. So think about the optical differences in relation to the physical differences. There is nothing like the complexity of fractals, where the smaller parts and bigger aggregates remain morphologically alike. This complexity is one of abrupt discontinuities and jolting shifts of gear, where the terms of meaning and feeling can be recast at any moment. And I think that jolting of shifts of gear and the discontinuity of the layering would be a good point to end the talk. So thanks for listening. Maybe we could bring an image up. Okay, are there any questions? Statements, perhaps? Criticisms? I'm up for it. Yes?
How do you feel transparency in the layering? Because you've got the under image and then the transparency on the top of it.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Like, how do you make the picture look transparent?
Okay, how do I make the picture look transparent is the question. I just use transparent floor varnish. You can buy it commercially, and I put tints in. I'm not at liberty to tell you what the make is, though, if that's what you're after. You'll have to find it yourself. Trade secret, I'm afraid. But that's happened through research and development. You know, I've had to find the right materials for me to use, because technically, a manufacturer of any of these materials, they don't put these materials together in this way. So I've had to find ways to kind of construct these paintings to suit me. Any manufacturer say, don't puddle a household paint or a floor varnish. It's not what you do. But I do it, and I get away with it. So basically, I don't make it transparent. It is already manufactured transparent. I put colours in, the different colours. And as a consequence, as you can see, it interrupts and interacts and is discontinuous with, as John Chilver says, various other areas of the paintings. So you've got that going on all the time. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, sorry, Michael. Could I ask you how you hang them? How is the hanging behind the picture?
Okay, the hanging. I've been asked how I hang the paintings. Are you talking about these ones or the earlier ones?
The ones in the hall, the big ones.
The big ones in the hall. It's really simple. They're just on two. I mean, well, not ordinarily they're hung on two screws, because there's a 2x1 frame on the back. And it's on MDF. I forgot to say, actually, all these paintings are on MDF, even the mirrored aluminium paintings. In the instance here, we had to use mirror plates. Sorry.
Sorry. Do you find that you ever suffer from bleed when using stuff?
Yes, and there are various ways around that. I mean, you can source all sorts of tape, like frog tape, and yes, I will tell you that much. Yeah, and I tend to rub it away. So I've actually, in some paintings, I've actually used the bleed and left it. I'm just going to see if there's an example. There might not be an example. But I tend to rub it away because I want that hard-edged look. No, there aren't any examples here.
So when you say rub it away?
Oh, I use terps to take the edge off. So when you peel up the thing, I use terps to take it, because that's the material, that's the cleaning fluid that you need for, or white spirit, you know, with these kind of materials. How you're supposed to clean your brushes, technically. I guess the nearest I can go is to go to this painting, which is a very recent painting. Here you can see an image, a Gilray image. I think it's Gilray, not Rowlandson. Oops. And you can see this bounded brush mark here, very much bound within its frame. Here I've left actually the edge deliberately so that you get a sense that it is brushy. Okay. Yes.
Do you think that there's a sort of legacy from your education at Goldsmiths, you know, that's sort of stuck with you right up until now? Are you conscious of that?
That's a loaded question. Is there a criticism there?
Well, I suppose in some ways it's obvious that we all
Yeah.
within our lives, and you know, it will descend. You know, you take it through, don't you? You can't just once you go through some sort of total recall
Absolutely.
memory wipe, you can't get rid of it.
No, I agree with you.
You know, is it
It's kind of...
about that education a lot, or you just put it to one side?
No, I think the thing is, one of the things that I mean, I've always had this kind of bent towards kind of asking questions about the value of painting. Ever since I started undergraduate course, what is this weird thing called painting? Why would you want to do it in, like, well, at the end of the 20th century when I started, or even now in the 21st century? I mean, it just seems so outmoded, which is why I got so excited about this notion of the death of painting. Then, not now. I'd like to think he's a bit more playful, and a bit more energetic and positive. But sure, I think the idea of criticality, and I think with a difficult medium like painting, and with all its attendant histories, and it is the most written about medium in art. I mean, we think about Alberti in the 1490s, writing one of the first treatises on what painting could be for an individual practitioner. Or we think of Vasari's Lives of the Artists. You know, these are there. They're embedded in painting's history and its critical theory. And I've often found that I've always been very interested in critical theory around painting. And Goldsmiths, I have to say, did foster that if you wanted it. So yeah, I do carry Goldsmiths with me a bit, but not exclusively. I mean, there are for me now, looking back, there are negative things, and I don't work there anymore, and I don't want to. Yeah, you take your education with you if you wish, I guess. Does that kind of answer the question? Okay. Any other questions? There's one there, yeah.
In your earlier work, you were playing with the boundaries between sculpture and painting.
Yeah.
Do you not feel any urge to continue that playfulness?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the boundaries between sculpture and painting is the question, and whether I can continue to think about whether that's interesting. Well, actually, I actually think of the paintings as physical. People often say, where's the relationship between those paintings? They seem like the stack paintings, as I call them. Some people call them the cake paintings. But of course, they're not cakes, they're paintings. Otherwise, I'd stick a cake on the wall, wouldn't I? For me, I think there are crossovers. I think there are crossovers in terms of materials, the relationship between, you know, the artisanal and utilitarian use of the materials and the construction and their making. But also the paintings in the gallery, if you look, I mean, they are layered. It's just they're much flatter. So that great bombastic sense of coming out of the wall, you know, in a very physical way, has reduced back, and I think that's, and I'm convinced that has some impact because of the way that I've reacted to the screen over the years. Because, you know, I mean, like one or two others in the audience, not many perhaps, I remember a time when the screen just didn't exist. I mean, the digital screen. And it's a really weird thing when you first come to something brand new like that, and you're kind of trying to operate something which is alien to your body. We're now very used to it. We're walking down the street and we're doing this, you know, not even thinking about it. But 10 years ago, when iPhones first started to be popular, people were like doing this, you know, like it was, you know, because physically you could grasp hold of it. So it's this relationship between a body and the image, I think, has changed. And I wanted to reflect that. So there's still a sense of the sculptural, but vague, but it's still there in its physicality. And if you run your fingers over the paintings, and you're not supposed to, but I'm not going to see it, am I? You run your fingers, I mean, you can see, you can feel the physicality. You can go up close and look at it. So there is a relationship, as far as I can see. But I think they are a different kind of embodiment. And embodiment is important to me in relation to the disembodiment of the screen, the physical embodiment, the act of making, thinking through painting, as a painting, but inflected or reflected through the screen now. Does that kind of answer the question? Thanks.
An extension of that question then, Michael, could I ask, would you ever consider taking the artwork off the wall? Or is that too far a step away from the painterly?
Would I consider, I'm doing this for the camera by the way, would I consider taking the artwork off the wall? There was a series of paintings I did many years ago which were just which were gridded, and they were overloaded grids on 8x4 plywood in household paint. with hard edges, and they were shown on the floor. It's a good question because it implies that, yes, we can extend or expand the language here, which of course we're familiar with painting. We use these terms all the time, don't we? You know, we use the post-medium condition, expanded painting, blah, blah, blah. The answer right now is no, and the reason being is that it so acts like a painting that I don't really need to kind of, as a physical object on a wall that we recognise, that by taking it on the floor, I think you don't further layer what's going on in the paintings, you actually detract from it. You don't really question the layering in the paintings and the kind of the reversal of opticalities. Because it's for me, it feels a bit like, for me it would be a bit like trying too hard to kind of put more quotation marks on it. I think if the paintings were monochrome, which is quite a good idea, I might use this, thanks Lynn. I'll pay you later. If they were monochrome, I would probably consider it actually, so that you make a real issue of it being on the floor. I think I have no problem with them acting as dumb as a painting on the wall. Does that kind of answer the question? Okay, I'm not sure I've entirely answered it, but it's the best I can do right now. Okay, yes.
Can we just come back to the step sorts?
Yes, of course.
You've got them commercially produced as printers.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think I know why you're asking, but that's fine. Sorry, the cursor's gone bonkers. Okay, let's make a sit. Okay, here we go. It's available to everyone. When you need something for your work, you research it. I just happen to go to a printer and say, here's a black and white image on, I just emailed a JPEG of that sign here, amongst others, and I said, I want them in different sizes. Could you print them out? So he just, it's a very simple technique. A printer will then just come and you turn up, and there's a roll, a vinyl roll, and you open it, and you have, there's the sticker for you. You stick it on your painting. Is that
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't realise you could get that through.
Yeah, I mean, all sign makers do this. You see them on the side of vans. You see them in gallery shop or shop fronts. That's what they do. It's great because it's temporary, because you can then peel them off and then put another sign on. Okay, yes.
The stack paintings
Yes.
that you started off with, they were canvas,
Yeah.
and you've progressed, you've used plywood, you've used aluminium, and then MDF.
Yeah.
Would you ever consider going back to canvas?
Okay, the stack paintings were canvas. I'm repeating the question for the stack paintings were canvas. I've been through various different other grounds. Will I go back to canvas? Actually, yes. I've thought about, and this is very much thinking, so I'm kind of reluctant to say this, but I'm putting myself on the line here. I would probably digitally print onto canvas as maybe to use as a background for one of these kind of paintings. And of course that reference would be in the painting. It would be clear. I would be making an art reference, there's no doubt. And I would happily do that. I mean, to be honest with you, it's partly expediency working on a flat ground, because household paints sit very well on MDF, and they don't crack. And a smooth surface is an easier surface to move these kinds of materials around on. But yes, I would consider...
And you'd stay large?
Probably, yeah, probably. Okay. It's nearly called to pass, so one more question, and I think we'll have to wind up because there's another group in here, I think.
I just have a question about the use of colour. I don't think you mentioned too much about it. Obviously with the layering, I think colour is really important in that, and it seems, looking at your paintings as a whole, as a series, that you come to a colour palette that works for you, or you're still developing that?
Okay, is the colour palette, developing a colour palette, that's a really good question, and I'll answer it very quickly. I'm a bit unconscious sometimes in the way that I make these things. I don't plan these things at all. I just make them as I go along. And I tend to use the same kinds of colours. I think they're my kinds of colours. I tell myself they're my kinds of colours. So I've developed a palette, perhaps, which is particular. There we go, there's a whole mixture of them. But I think the colour is so important, very important. And it is a reflection of the world. And I am very interested in colour relations. And that's another aspect of the painting. I disingenuously referred to those colour relations earlier on as decorative, but I wanted to make the point about the materials. I think colour relations, and in particular, I mean, I actually really like the colour relations in this painting. They're very simple. But they're the right hue yellow, the right hue red, you know, with this kind of rather ugly, flesh-like, washed-out tone. Hue, sorry. So yeah, colour is important, and I've done it. I think it's quite an unconscious development of colour, but through practice and use, I recognise now, in retrospect, that they are very particular. Okay, and I think Alberto has something he wants to tell you.
I just need to do a couple of things before we close. One is to remind that there's a social event every night. Just in between the two main events, the 5 p.m. and the 7:30, tonight is dedicated for nights for fine art and design students, but it's open to all students. Tomorrow will be dance, the day after it's drama, and on Thursday it's music. Friday it's sponsors dinner. The Dean of Arts and Humanities, Professor Rees, has kindly agreed to put £200 behind the bar every night, so that's free.
Does that include tonight?
Including tonight, so you can continue the conversation.
Don't race to the bar. Orderly queue.
And we have, so the Great Hall has been decorated for this purpose, and we've got some food as well, a bit of food, free food as well. And the second thing, obviously, is to welcome you for coming to this talk, and welcome Michael for the wonderful talk, and everybody's asked a question, very interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.